Dear students, in this video we'll be talking about the major abiotic factors that affect or that are a major reason for the distribution of various kinds of plants and animals on the entire planet. The major abiotic factors which we'll be talking about here or that are playing major role in the distribution of organisms are temperature, water, light and soil. So in this video we'll be discussing about various types or various effects of these factors. Let us first talk about the temperature. It is the most important it is the most important abiotic factor. Now, the temperature is considered as one of the most important because it decides the distribution of various kinds of organisms. Now we see that there is a variation in the average temperature of the earth during different seasons. Now, if we see to the earth, the temperature normal when we study this is the equator. When we are talking this is the equator and these are the poles. Now, the equator over here, the temperature when we talk from the equator towards the pole, the temperature decreases. And this is because the equatorial region receives the direct rays of the sun and therefore the temperature is very high, whereas the polar region receives the slanting rays of the earth and the slanting rays of the sun, and therefore the temperature is comparatively very low. Also, when we see that that compared to the plains and the mountains will have a lower temperature and the plain as compared to that of the plains. So here the altitude is playing a major role. So therefore we find that temperature varies. Also, when we talk of the aquatic environment or the aquatic habitat, there are thermal springs and deep sea hydrothermal vents. And these are unique habitats because here the temperature is more than 100 degrees Celsius. And in spite of such high temperatures, the organisms are still able to survive. So there are various factors that cause or that are affecting the temperature. And these factors are latitude, altitude. The third is the topography. Fourth is vegetation. And the fifth is slope aspect. Now, these are the most important five features that affect the temperature. Now, when we talk of the latitude, the equatorial regions, that is the places with the lower latitude. So, the lower latitude or the equatorial region, they have high temperature. High temperature because they receive the direct sunlight from the sun. Now, therefore, the temperature is very high, and the higher altitude will receive the slanting rays and therefore the low temperature. Talking of altitude, the as we move from plains to mountains, the altitude increases and the temperature decreases. The higher the altitude, the lower will be the temperature. Now here you can understand by the term lapse rate. Lapse rate it is the rate at which it is the rate at which the atmospheric temperature decreases with increase in altitude. So, the average lapse rate is around 6.5 degrees Celsius for 1000 meters of elevation. So there is a decrease of 6.5 if the it is found to be 6.5 degrees Celsius for 1000 meters of elevation. So we find the altitude affects the rate of temperature, that is the decrease of the temperature. Then the topography, that is the arrangement of the physical features of the physical features, that is arrangement of the area, the plants and everything that affects. Then it has the vegetation, that is the plants, and the slope aspect, that is the effect of the sunlight will be there if there is a slope over there. So it will also affect the vegetation. So we find these are the major factors that affect the temperature. Now, the why we are saying that it is the most important abiotic factor, it is because it affects the kinetics of the enzymes, and therefore and it affects the kinetics of the enzyme, and therefore it will also affect the basal metabolic rate, and therefore affects the basal metabolic rate. Now, since this is the temperature is affecting, we have studied the role of temperature in the kinetics of the enzyme. We know how it affects. So, if it is not suitable for the enzyme working, then obviously the overall metabolic rate of the organism will also be affected. And this is the reason we find specific flora and fauna in a particular temperature zone. Now, the levels of the thermal, uh, that is the tolerance, we call it as a thermal tolerance, that is the temperature range at which the organism is able to survive and thrive. So, the level of thermal tolerance of different species determine to a large extent their geographical distribution. So, how the species distribution will happen, it will depend upon the thermal tolerance of that particular species. Now, depending upon the thermal tolerance, we have classified the organisms into two categories. One is the thermal tolerance. We have first the eurythermal organisms. Eurythermal organisms, and second we have stenothermal organisms. Now, when we talk of eurythermal organisms are those which can tolerate and thrive a wide range of temperature. So they can thrive in wide range of temperature. And can you give an example? It's very easy. Birds and mammals are very good example because they are found like human beings. We belong to eurythermal because we are capable of surviving in wide range of temperature. Stenothermal, they have narrow range. That means they can thrive in this particular range only. An example are frogs, various reptiles. These are very good examples for stenothermal organism which can only survive within a narrow range. So we see that over here the temperature has a major influence in the distribution pattern of organism, and it is therefore very important in present day context because as the temperature of the earth is changing, it may cause extinction or the decrease in the number of various kinds of species, because the distribution of organisms of plants and animals, that is, depends upon majorly on the temperature, and it also decides the distribution pattern. Now, let us talk about the second important abiotic factor, and that is water. Water is again an important abiotic factor. It is more so because the life originated in water and life cannot be continued without water. We know water is very essential for our uh, metabolism, and almost 70 to 80% or maybe more is the water in the as the major content of our cell. Now, the main source of water is atmospheric precipitation. So, the source of water is atmospheric precipitation. And this atmospheric precipitation can be in the form of rain, it can be in the form of snow, hail, etc. Now, the productivity and the distribution of plants is heavily dependent on water. So the water is an important factor that decides about the distribution of plants. So therefore, the plants which are specifically or specially adapted can thrive in a particular condition. For example, the plants and animals which are surviving in desert are especially adapted to that particular, because their body have specific modifications which are well suited for that particular environment, especially desert, because there is a limited supply of water or limited water availability. Now, let's talk of the aquatic organism. Now, aquatic organisms are in water itself, but there also we find that within the aquatic habitat, the distribution of organisms is mainly governed by the salinity, that is the contents of the salts in the water, and the pH of water, that is affecting the distribution. Now, salinity in water is an important criteria. Now, some of the organisms which can withstand high level or a wide range of salinity are known as euryhaline. So euryhaline are those organisms that have wide range of salinity. That is, this wide range they can survive. Whereas stenohaline are the organisms that have a narrow range of narrow range within which they can survive, and they will be able to thrive in that particular habitat. The reason why salinity is considered more important, because if we see the freshwater animal, which has comparatively, the fresh water will be having very lower salinity. Now, the freshwater animal will not be able to thrive in saline water. If we put freshwater animal into saline water, in saline water, that is high salinity water, this particular organism will not be able to survive. The reason being due to the osmotic concentration. Now, due to which the body of the freshwater animal is not suited to meet the requirement which is required with the high salinity water, because there will be the osmotic problem, and as a result the freshwater animal will not be able to survive. Water is therefore again an important feature which decides on to the distribution of the organism. Now, let us understand the distribution of, or let us understand the formation of various kinds of biomes. So temperature and water we have studied. Now based upon that, because these two are major, we have the formation of biomes due to the temperature and water. So let us first understand through the diagram. This is the mean annual temperature, and this is mean annual precipitation. Now here we find and here now in this diagram we are going to study the different kinds one by one. The first over here, that when we study, I'll explain it to you. This is the mean annual precipitation, and this is the mean annual temperature. These areas which you see over here are different biomes. I'll demark them, separate them. Let us talk about first is the Arctic, and it is the Arctic and Alpine tundra. So first over here is Arctic and Alpine tundra. The second which you see over here is the coniferous forest. So over here, let me put it by the dots. This is the coniferous forest. Coniferous forest. Then we have the third one, that is the temperate forest. So over here, I'll put dash over here, and this is the temperate. Third is the temperate forest. Temperate forest. So we have here temperate forest. Then we have the fourth one, that is the grassland. That is, sorry, the tropical forest. So over here we have this as the tropical forest. The one which you see over here is the grassland, and the last one is the desert. So over here, this is the desert. Now, if we analyze this diagram, let us try and understand what are these different regions. So as told, there are 6 major biomes on the earth. The first 3 I have already mentioned over here. The fourth is the tropical forest. The fifth is the grassland. And sixth is the desert. So these are the 6 major biomes on the planet Earth. And these 6 major biomes are based upon the precipitation, and that is the rainfall pattern and the temperature of the region. Now, the biomes are, let us understand why or how these biomes are formed. The biomes are formed due to the rotation and the revolution of our planet, and also the tilt of the earth. Now this revolution, rotation and the tilt of the planet causes the variation in the temperature, that is the changes in the intensity and the duration of the light, which directly affects the temperature, that means increase and decrease, and also it will affect the seasons. Now, as the temperature varies and the sun rays, whether they are reaching directly or whether they are reaching slant, there is a different precipitation pattern, and the precipitation therefore and the temperature results into the formation of the 6 major biomes. So here we have Arctic and Alpine tundra, coniferous forest, temperate forest, tropical forest, grassland and desert. Now, let us, if we see in this pictorial representation, let us try and understand. Now here we see that Arctic and Alpine tundra, from the picture itself you can make out that over here the mean annual precipitation is not very high, but still it is in the form of snow because the temperature is below sub-zero. So since the temperature is below sub-zero, mostly the precipitation is in the form of snow over here, and it is uh, it is not very, the temperature is not high and it is very low over here. Now, the distribution of the organisms in this area will be limited because over here those organisms which are well adapted can only go for this particular habitat. Second comes the coniferous forest. You can make out and you can remember the coniferous forest by the picture itself, and you can make out that over here the coniferous have high rain. That means the annual precipitation is quite high and the temperature is low. It is not higher. The temperature is lower over here. Coming to the temperate forests, they have precipitation which is medium level, not very low, and also the temperature range is high. The tropical forests, on the other hand, have high temperature and high rainfall pattern. You can see from the diagram, that picture, that the temperature is high and also the rainfall is quite high. So they are very rich in biodiversity. Coming to the grassland, they have high temperature. The summers will be very hot and the temperature can go up to 0 degree or maybe slightly lower. The precipitation is poor, as you can see from the picture. Now the desert have high temperature and very low precipitation. So if we see over here, the Arctic region and the desert region both have low precipitation, but they differ because Arctic region has very low temperature, whereas the desert region has high temperature. So we find over here that different biomes are formed due to the effect of the temperature and water, and these will obviously then affect the type of vegetation or the type of organism that thrive in this particular biomes. Coming to the next abiotic factor, that is the light. Light, again, all of you know that it is an important uh, factor that is required for the photosynthesis. So mostly all the plants undergo the process of photosynthesis, that is that the productivity is affected. Now the many species of plants, which are especially small ones, are well adapted to lower levels of light. That means light intensity is low, then also they are capable of performing photosynthesis. Some plants, on the other hand, require a certain period of flowering for a certain period of light for flowering. So there are different kinds of adaptations which are needed by the plants, and the plants can thrive only in certain amount of, or the light intensity is required by them. Now, many animals also they have their photo period for their reproductive and migratory activities. Now, the availability of light on the land is linked with temperature, because if the temperature, that means if the availability of the light is high, the temperature will also be high. Now in the case of aquatic organisms which are surviving in deep sea, these deep sea have, like, if we go down into the sea, the light is not available over there. Now over there, the organisms have the chemical reactions as their source of energy. So for them, the for the energy source is not sun, but it is mainly the chemical reactions. Also, there is an interesting question that says that if we are having that, if we compare the red algae, the green algae, and the brown algae, these are the various algal forms, and these algal forms, out of these three, which one is likely to be found in the deepest water? And the answer is the red algae. The red algae will be found in the deepest waters because the red light has the longest wavelength. So because the light is made up of 7 colors, and out of that, the light of red wavelength can penetrate deep, and therefore we will find red algae in the deepest of the waters. And light is very important again for deciding onto the productivity. Now the fourth important abiotic factor is the soil. Soil is the weathered layer of Earth's crust, and it is mainly made up of minerals and partly composed, the partly decomposed organic matter. So it is mainly made up of minerals plus partly decomposed organic matter. And this is brought about by the weathering of the rocks and the transportation, sedimentation of the particles. So there is a different procedure for the formation of the soil. Now, the type of the soil is determined by the nature of the minerals which is present in the soil. So these minerals decide which type of soil it is. And the soil characteristics such as the composition of the soil, the rate of percolation, water holding capacity of the soil, the pH of the soil, all this decides on the type of the vegetation and the animals which will be thriving in that particular zone. Now, therefore, soil also comes as an important abiotic factor that determines the type of organisms which will be thriving in that particular area. So here we have tried to analyze that how these abiotic factors affect the distribution or the type of vegetation or the flora and fauna which is found in a particular region, and how these have caused the formation of different kinds of biomes.